Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Ramesh and this is my screencast for our race unit in AMER200. Throughout this unit we have examined many areas of race, in particular how the ideas of slavery, racial hierarchy, and segregation have impacted the development of race within our society. During the 17th and 18th centuries, millions of African slaves were kidnapped from their homes in Africa and brought across the Atlantic to work the agricultural crops essential to the growth of the economy of the United States. These slaves were brutally mistreated by their owners, who saw them as property and not as humans. As we can see from the image, a slave family is being auctioned as property to would-be slave owners. While resistance of the enslaved was common and helped to build unity among slaves, the reprisal for resistance was harsh and was used as a way to control the minds and hearts of the slaves. If we take a look at our first site from history.com, it gives us a sense of the treatment and resistance imposed on slaves. This section says they were prohibited from learning to read and write, and their behavior and movement was restricted. Many masters took sexual liberties with slave women and rewarded obedient slave behavior with favors, while rebellious slaves were brutally punished. Another idea of race that we discussed was racial hierarchy. Racial hierarchy played a major role in race in America. In this hierarchy, the white population defined themselves as a superior race because of the social and economic advantage they obtained over others in society. The white race considered themselves as civilized, while in contrast to the savage race of the blacks and Indians. This level of superiority has allowed the white race to obtain a privileged status over other races, which allows them to discriminate against other races that are not of the same level or standard as themselves. Thomas Jefferson was the first predominant American who suggested that blacks were inferior to whites. In his comment here it says, "I advance it therefore as a suspicion only that blacks are inferior to whites in the endowment of body and mind." Samuel Morton, the famous American scientist, claimed to measure brain capacity through skull size. Since the white race had a larger skull, it suggested unquestionable superiority to the rest of the races. In our next idea of race, we look at segregation. Although the Civil War ended slavery in the United States, it began a new era of segregation that built on the mentality that blacks were inferior to whites. It saw the creation of segregation laws or Jim Crow laws, which separated blacks and whites in all aspects of life. Few of these aspects were in schooling, where black students were separated from white students, and black students were provided less funding and materials than the white students. In housing, blacks were relegated to specific neighborhoods away from white homes and businesses. The image on this site shows us the inhumanity of these Jim Crow laws. As we can see from the site, a sign points to a colored-only waiting room. This was part of the segregation laws to keep whites and blacks away at all times and in all aspects of society. And we can also see that the segregation laws brew a new form of discrimination against blacks, where groups such as the Ku Klux Klan use violence, as we can see on this image of this man being lynched, to further discriminate against blacks. My primary sources, I chose the image of Ruby Bridges leaving a white-only school in 1960. Ruby was the only black student to attend this school in New Orleans after the integration of schools was achieved with the landmark Supreme Court decision on Brown versus the Board of Education. As slaves brought from Africa had resisted their enslavement, Ruby is also resisting the efforts of the white population to control her future. As we can see from the police protection around her, this act is bound to cause reprisals from the white community, but she is determined to see it through. This image also looks at the act of segregation in society. We have learned through this unit. Ruby is an example of how segregation has become the norm among the American white race. By attending the school, Ruby was a challenge to this norm, but also she was a challenge to the belief that whites were superior to blacks. She has now placed herself at the same level by attending an institution created for a superior white race. I think this image really looks at all aspects of what we have studied throughout this unit, from resistance to segregation to equality, and how all this is tied in, and how individuals have been discriminated and put at different levels in order to control their minds, and how through movements such as the civil rights movement they've been able to achieve equality. Thank you everyone for listening to my screencast, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you.